The European Union, a supposed symbol of global cooperation and economic strength, is showing serious cracks. But what if I told you these cracks are about to split the Eurozone apart entirely? It might sound far-fetched, but the reality is that a combination of massive pension liabilities, soaring inflation, and energy shortages could be leading the EU to a major collapse. In today's video, we're diving deep into the hidden risks that could spell disaster for the Eurozone. From unfunded pensions to a bond market on the brink, we'll show you why we could be facing the slow fall of one of the world's largest economies. So let's get started. This video is produced by the team at Capitalist Exploits. Headed by professional asset managers Chris McIntosh and Brad McFadden, the team hunts for deep value assets that are surprisingly contrarian despite strong fundamental cases for potential future appreciation. If you're looking to gain access and insight as to the personal investments of active hedge fund managers and in-depth reasoning as to why they've invested in the assets they're sharing, check the links in the description below. You'll get access to advice on how to allocate, organize, and think about your portfolio, while joining a growing community of people thinking outside of the box. Enjoy monthly updates, open Q&As, regular newsletters, a community forum, organized portfolios, investing education videos, and more with the Capitalist Exploits Insider subscription. If you're not ready to fully take the leap, we also offer the Capitalist Exploits Insider newsletter series for $1 for the first 30 days and $35 a month thereafter. Do note, our investing strategy and philosophy can deviate a lot from the mainstream. We offer a money-back guarantee regardless, but make sure you're on board with our investing philosophy and global outlook before deciding to join us. To understand the brewing crisis, let's first talk about what's sitting at the core of this issue: unfunded pension liabilities and demographic collapse. Right now, countries like France, Italy, and Germany are carrying out pension obligations that are 300% to 500% of their GDP. These pensions, promised in an era of optimism, are now turning into ticking time bombs. Why? Europe's population is aging rapidly and its birth rates are plummeting. There simply aren't enough workers to fund these pension systems anymore. Here's the scary part. When you add these unfunded pensions on top of an already massive debt pile, it's clear the math doesn't work. Countries will have no choice but to borrow even more just to keep paying out pensions, pushing themselves toward economic disaster. Now, here's where it gets worse. This isn't just a problem for one or two countries. If major nations in Europe start defaulting on their pension obligations, the entire Eurozone could be pulled into a debt spiral that no one is prepared for. But it's not just pensions. Another big part of the problem is hiding in plain sight: the bond markets. Let's dig into why they're just as dangerous as the pension crisis. Well, here's where the cracks really start to show. The Eurozone's bond markets are incredibly fragile, and they're another ticking time bomb that could go off at any time. The Eurozone has never managed to fully integrate the bond markets of its member states. Countries like Germany enjoy much lower borrowing costs than Italy or Greece. This disparity in bond yields creates a massive problem. If one of the weaker economies, like Italy or Spain, sees a collapse in its bond market, it could send shockwaves throughout the entire Eurozone. And here's where it gets tricky. If one country's bonds collapse, investor confidence across the Eurozone could tank, leading to capital flight and potentially a collapse of the euro itself. Imagine this. One day, you wake up and hear that Italy's bond market is in freefall. Investors, fearing a broader crisis, begin pulling money out of Spain, Greece, and Portugal, triggering a domino effect that could very quickly spread to France and even Germany. That's essentially the systemic risk we're talking about. And if you think the bond market is fragile now, just wait until you hear about how rising energy costs and inflation are piling on to this already volatile situation. The destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline has added a massive layer of complexity to an already fragile Eurozone economy. Europe was heavily dependent on cheap Russian gas to keep energy costs low, but now, with Nord Stream gone, they're scrambling to import energy from more expensive sources. The results? Energy costs are skyrocketing, which is driving inflation through the roof across the continent. Industries are facing higher operational costs, which makes European business less competitive globally. Meanwhile, households are being squeezed by rising utility bills, cutting into consumer spending and slowing down the economy. Inflation isn't just a headache, it's becoming a full-blown economic crisis, and it's putting even more pressure on countries already drowning in debt. But rising energy prices aren't happening in a vacuum. Let's look at how Europe's own climate policies are making the situation even worse. This is one of the biggest drivers of Europe's energy crisis that no one's talking about enough: the irresponsible climate policies. It's becoming ever more clear as the years go by that Europe's push toward aggressive climate change regulations has done more harm than good, especially in the context of an already strained economy. The EU has been leading the global charge on green energy, shutting down nuclear plants, curbing coal production, and pushing hard for renewables like wind and solar. But here's the reality: renewable energy is not ready to replace fossil fuels at the scale needed to support industrial economies. This premature shift away from reliable energy sources has left Europe vulnerable to the very crisis it's facing now. The loss of Russian gas and the destruction of Nord Stream hit Europe harder than it should have, precisely because it's been over-reliant on intermittent energy sources like wind and solar, which can't provide consistent baseload power. And let's not forget, many of these climate policies have increased energy costs for both businesses and consumers. The results? Higher inflation, reduced competitiveness, and a greater reliance on energy imports from unstable regions. The European Central Bank is now faced with a problem that seems almost impossible to solve. On the one hand, it needs to raise interest rates to combat the rampant inflation that's eating away at the economy. But on the other hand, raising rates would make it more expensive for countries like Italy and Greece to service their enormous public debts. So, what does the ECB do? Raise rates to fight inflation and risk a sovereign debt crisis, or keep rates low and let inflation spiral out of control? The truth is, they're trapped. There's no easy way out, and every decision they make comes with enormous risks. And if the ECB gets it wrong, if it raises rates too aggressively or keeps them too low for too long, it could end up triggering a financial meltdown. But while central banks are wrestling with this dilemma, wealthy Europeans are already preparing for the worst. Let's talk about what they're doing and why it matters. One of the most alarming trends is the capital flight happening across Europe. Wealthy individuals and corporations are quietly moving their resources out of the Eurozone and into safer currencies and assets. Why? Because they see the writing on the wall. They don't trust the Euro's future stability. If this capital exodus continues, the Euro itself could come under intense pressure. Wealth leaving the system is like pulling the foundation out from under a house. It weakens everything. And here's the kicker. If governments in the Eurozone sense that more capital is fleeing, and with the direction Europe is heading in, they may introduce capital controls, which would only further damage trust in the currency and which also never work anyways. If the euro continues to lose value, the confidence crisis could escalate rapidly, turning this slow collapse into a full-blown currency crisis. In response to the growing threat of capital flight, some European governments are looking to roll out central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. On the surface, CBDCs seem like a cutting-edge financial tool, and they most definitely are when implemented without malice. But in the case of the EU these days, the real reason behind them could be capital control. By introducing CBDCs, European governments would gain greater control over financial transactions, allowing them to restrict the movement of capital out of the Eurozone. Essentially, it would give governments a digital lever to control where money goes and would be a last-ditch effort at preventing capital flight and the collapse of the euro. But here's the problem. If people view these CBDCs as a way for governments to trap their wealth, trust in the entire financial system could evaporate. Instead of restoring stability, this move could accelerate capital flight, making the situation even worse. At the end of the day, people will always innovate ways around government red tape, and no amount of kicking and screaming from EU bureaucrats will change that. So, while financial systems are under pressure, geopolitical risks are also pushing the Eurozone closer to the edge. Let's lastly talk about how conflicts and global politics are driving fragmentation in the EU. We just can't ignore the geopolitical tensions that are making Europe's economic problems even more dangerous. The Russia-Ukraine conflict has not only disrupted energy supplies, but also fractured Europe's economic ties, especially with Eastern European countries that were heavily dependent on Russian gas. As geopolitical tensions rise, the risk of economic fragmentation within the Eurozone becomes more real. If the crisis deepens, we could see countries reconsidering their membership in the Union, especially as economic strain pulls them in different directions. Ultimately, if the geopolitical situation continues to deteriorate, economic and political unity within the Eurozone could fall apart. And when that happens, the entire structure of the European Union could start to unravel. So, to wrap it all up, the Eurozone is standing on the edge of a potential crisis. Unfunded pensions, rising debt, soaring inflation, and a fragile energy market are all threatening the region's stability. The ECB is trapped in a difficult position, and capital flight is already showing signs that wealthy Europeans don't trust the future of the euro. Throw in the potential for geopolitical shocks and the controversial introduction of CBDCs, and it's clear that the Eurozone could very well be facing a slow but inevitable collapse. Analyzing trends and geopolitical situations as they relate to investment and finance is one of the core things we do over at Capitalist Exploits Insider. If you're interested in joining a community of like-minded investors and getting access to all the most important data organized by professional hedge fund managers on a weekly and monthly basis, check out the links in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to stay informed.